Shalom. Good morning. Glad you're here this morning for our Bible study at the Elmore congregation. I was sort of inspired with this Bible study this morning. Oh, wait a minute. I don't want to interrupt anybody's conversation. I was inspired Wednesday night. Our brother gave a talk on why should we love Jesus, or why do we love Jesus? I can't remember the exact title. Y'all remember exactly Wednesday night? Why I love Jesus, I guess, was the gist of it, and he gave us several reasons, and that sort of kind of led me in a direction. I thought, well, what about the idea of what's unique about Jesus? And some of the things, of course, that are unique about him that we all appreciate and understand, but there are things, practical things, that I think are unique to what Jesus provides us. And so I want to look at that, the idea of, give me Jesus. And it all starts in John chapter 12. All of the references are in John. In this morning's lesson, I'll have to make a correction. You want to mark through all the Colossian passages. I had a COVID moment, I suppose, but there's 2 Corinthians. It's not Colossians. So I'm glad I caught it before you did. Anyway, this is not on this sheet. It's on the sermon sheet. I'm just giving you a heads up, okay? So if anybody asks you, says, what is this guy? It's Colossians, it's 2 Corinthians. You'll say, yeah, he knows. He's made the correction. So y'all can be my defenders, okay? So anyway, in John 12, there's a interesting statement in regard to Christ about some people who have come and they're searching for him. And so let's go ahead and read that, and then we'll get into some of the aspects of why Jesus is unique in his own right. Now, there were some Greeks among those who were going to worship at the feast. These then came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and began to ask him, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip came and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip came and told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, saying, The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal. Well, I think I missed it. Truly, truly, I say unto you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it does, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it to eternal life. If anyone serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. I always found that last phrase to be kind of interesting. How does the Father honor us? Would be a topic for discussion. But it brings in or introduces the idea that when we follow Christ and we are loyal disciples of his, there's some benefits that come our way. We're all about benefits. We're all about, in a sense, part of Christianity is I'll follow because I want to go to heaven. You can call it selfish, but I think it's commendable. It's a desire to go and be with God. It's a desire to avoid another place that may not be where one would like to go. So in that sense, it is somewhat personal that there's a place where I want to go. But then there are some other benefits in God honoring us and in what we receive from God that's unique to Jesus and unique to his people. And so look at John 14:6. You know this passage. It's one of the ones that I suppose is characteristic of the church. Those who've been raised in the church, and what you hear a lot is a passage that we emphasize, at least preachers have through the years. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. So it's only through Christ, and if we follow him, God honors us. And then the things that are mentioned here, the idea that Jesus is the only way, he's the only truth, and he's the only life. So all of those things have some practical aspects to them, benefits that are not just abstract ideas. They're not just theological truths that we believe. I think there's some actual benefit, practical aspect of what God provides for us and what he does for us if we're in Jesus. And so that's sort of the way out, direction I'd like for us to think about when we talk about what's so unique about Jesus. Well, there's three things that are mentioned. Really four things I got here, but we're used to the three things. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So what is it? Jesus is the only way. Okay, what would be your answer? What is he talking about? He's the only way, what? He's the only way to God. What else? And we might need to clarify that, because there's a certain aspect that one could see the heavens and the natural universe and have some concept or understanding of God. So when we say he's the only way to God, can we elaborate that on that a little bit more? Okay, redemption. He's the only way of salvation, redemption. He's the only way. Only way to get to heaven? Yeah. All of those are grand things, aren't they? I mean, redemption, salvation, heaven, and those are big. Are there anything, or is there something, or are there aspects that flow from Jesus to us that are more practical in a sense, that right now benefits? Not something that we know we're going to heaven if we're in Christ, but that's still, sometime in the future. But are there any practical things? I know we got salvation, okay, we're free from our sin, but are there other kind of benefits received when it talks about Jesus being the way? You see what I'm asking? Does that make sense? It's not just theological. It's not just theological over here, grandiose. And those are, I'm not saying that's not important. That's the driving force. But some people will say that's pie in the sky stuff. We have the words of Jesus. And so in what way is that practical to us? Everyday living, benefit, something that, impacts us every day. So think about these things for just a minute. Jesus is the only way, and we know the grand things. But what about this? He's the only way out of despair. The only way out of despair. Look at John chapter 14, verse 1. Very handy passage. Interestingly, John 14, 15, and 16 is sort of a intimate opportunity to listen in on a conversation between Jesus and his disciples. Okay? The disciples have somewhat of a difficulty with the idea that Jesus is going to leave them. And they're going to be left what? Alone. I mean, that's pretty practical. Okay, we're going to be alone. You're going to leave. We're going to be alone. So this whole conversation that Jesus has in these three chapters are very close to us if we identify with how the disciples are feeling. We've been following this God-man around for 3 years, and now when we think we just have reached a point that maybe we can do this thing, you're going to leave us? Okay, and this is where Jesus promises that at his departure, what's going to be sent to aid? The Holy Spirit, the Advocate, the Comforter will be sent. Okay, now John 14 verse 1 though says, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me." So what is the idea of trouble? Do not let your heart be troubled. What are troubled hearts? How would you describe a troubled heart? Yeah. COVID-19, man. It's almost like the word Jesus. You know the answer to anything. You know, what's this, COVID? You can imagine on the standpoint of the disciples that they have some angst about the task that they've been equipped to do, the mission that they're responsible for, and their leader is going to be departing. Do not let your heart be troubled. You've experienced troubled heart before? So what's the feeling of a troubled heart? Get you down? I can remember when we had our man-child, our only boy child. When he was born, he had a hole in his heart. And so here we are, the birth of the baby, and then they rushed him over here to this other unit, and they're like working on him. And we're sitting there, what's going on? I mean, that's kind of frightening. And I remember seeing Nathan's chest kind of, it wasn't doing right. And then after he was regulated and I got everything fine, we were informed that he was going to have open heart surgery to repair the hole in his heart. I mean, this is crazy. But the time that was involved in that was very disconcerting. I mean, we had troubled hearts. We even were trying to have pictures made of all of us because we didn't know if we were going to have him after surgery. We didn't know what was going to happen after that. So, it was kind of like we expect the best, but we prepare for the worst type of thing. That's a very difficult time. Now, that's an aspect of troubled heart. I know Christians are not to be at the point of despair or have those feelings, but that's false. We do have roller coaster rides of emotion. You can't dispel things like that. We have to draw on our faith and our Savior and talk to God and get close to the church and allow our brothers and sisters to help us. But I think in one way in which Jesus is the only way is that to truly emerge and to truly have what you need at the time, Jesus is the only way. I think we would agree with that. I mean, you can go to, there's all kinds of things available for people at school, at our university. We have all kinds, you can go to a psychologist, you can go to a doctor, anybody has any kind of trouble. But even with the proliferation of help, it doesn't seem to stop despair, troubled hearts. They're still there. We have all the aids, but it seems like the rise of stuff, it just keeps rising. More people have it, more problem students, and it's kind of an interesting idea. There's something about faith. When a person has faith, it doesn't eliminate feelings, but it is something that we draw upon. And he definitely is a cure for troubled hearts. Here he is telling his disciples, you don't need to be troubled. You need to be in a panic or place of despair, anything. Just know that although I'll depart, I'm not leaving you as what? Remember what he says in that conversation with him? I will not leave you as orphans. So, you're not alone. God, Christ, is with us. So, the way out of despair. Here's something else. Look at John chapter 16, verse 1. Jesus is the way out of disaster. 16, verse 1. Listen to this passage. These things I have spoken to you so that you may be kept from what? Stumbling. Is that what everybody has? Okay. What is it to stumble? That's often used metaphorically. Yeah. To stumble, oftentimes in the New Testament, is the idea of disaster. And the one that keeps us on track, even when there's falls or we trip, it doesn't lead to disaster. We hang on, we persevere, we stay close to our Savior. So, he tells his disciples that I've spoken to you, and my relationship with you and who I am, it's to keep you from stumbling. Now, he says that you may not stumble. So the point is the relationship we have with Christ in our faith is something that's to be massaged and strengthened. The idea of a Christian not stumbling is taught in the New Testament. We talked about, the Christian virtues last Sunday evening. If we continue to practice these, we shall never what? Stumble, and entrance into the eternal kingdom shall be given to us. So Jesus, in our connection to him, he's the way out of disaster, out of stumbling. Staying close to him, realizing that is very, very important. There's another aspect, and that is he's the way out of danger. So what do you mean? What's the degree of separations of these? Well, let's look at some of the passages here. Look at John 15, verse 18. If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because the world hates you. Remember the word that I spoke to you. A slave is not greater than the master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. So what's the answer in regard to he's the way out of danger? Now, when he talks about persecution and things of that nature, how does he reinforce or encourage his disciples? What does he say? Does he say that I'll remove you from danger? Actually, he promises that if they harass me, I will harass you. They harassed me, and since you're my disciple, you'll be harassed. They hated me, they'll hate you. How's there an escape from that? That's what I'm asking. How's that an escape from danger? Yeah. But not only that, but I think it's a practical thing too. Peter would say, if you share the sufferings of Christ, the like sufferings, his, things that he went through, and they're common to us, then what's our attitude? Huh? Joy. That's crazy, ain't it? Isn't it? I guess I should say. Yeah, it is crazy. But see, deliverance from, like Paul would often say, God will deliver me whatever people will do to me. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hey, God's the deliverer. If He chooses to actually deliver us from the flaming furnace, okay. But if He doesn't, okay. Glory be to God. See the different attitude? That's very practical. It's not just, abstract. Yeah, it's spiritual aid, but it has a strengthening component to it. When we are close to Christ, and we understand and we've had the faith, then we are delivered from danger. In other words, our attitude, we may actually be slaughtered, as Christians were, and they said, bring it on. It's crazy, isn't it? And yet that's the power of what Christ provides for us. Despair, disaster, and danger. If God be for us, who can be against us? And you keep reading, shall the sword, the spear, all this. So you get the idea. It is spiritual, but it's also very practical. You can't separate the spiritual from the physical, because the spiritual is going to, fuel our attitude and our actions. Does this make any sense? Go ahead.
We're not going through it at the moment, it's kind of hard to still. I have a conversation almost daily with a young man who has cancer.
Yeah.
5 years old. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't know whether he's going to make it through this or not. And, there's a good chance he will not. Mm-hmm. And without this, of course, before our conversation, he really felt hopeless. Mm-hmm. In this family.
Yeah.
And with this, he's got to that point where he says, okay, if I live, I'm going to let people know that God brought me through this. And if I don't, it's okay. So my life is God.
Yeah, sort of a longer view of things, isn't it? Yeah. See, most people, beginning and end is birth and death. For God's people, it's not that way at all. There might be a physical transition that occurs, but that doesn't mean the end of things for us. We have a longer view of things, right? So this is one way in which I think Christianity is very encouraging, and often it's not what is shared at a very practical level to people like you were talking about. This changes and potentially can change the whole persona of an individual when they realize not only those grandiose theological truths, but also something that's very near, that's impacting me right now at this moment with this situation. Go ahead.
Chapter 14, verse 1 also, there's one word that is such a key here. Mm-hmm. It says, let not your heart be troubled. It implies, I have a choice.
Yeah, a choice in the matter. Yeah. Yeah. The emphasis is on the idea of let not your heart be troubled. It's the same thing as let your light so shine. It often pivots on where we are and our relationship to God. So Jesus is the only way out of despair, disaster, and danger. Jesus is the only truth. Okay, what's the truths? What are some of the truths? Well, you look in the conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples. He's the only truth about the source of comfort. About the source of comfort. He says, I'm going to send you an advocate, a comforter, who will guide you. And of course, he's talking specifically to his 12 disciples here. But the idea, as we'll talk about in our lesson during the worship period, there is comfort that is provided through Christ. And so you think about the opposite of troubled Okay? If I'm troubled, think about the opposite. I can be comforted. See, it's like comfort puts out the troubled heart, right? So he's the only source of what we would call true comfort. This is why you'd have passages, the peace that passes all understanding, things like that, can be very practical and near in our walk with Christ. He's the only source of courage. Now, I know there's courage all around that's shown in different ways, but I'm specifically talking about the courage of God's people relative to the things that we fight, the battle that we're in, the spiritual battle. And, everything can ultimately be reduced to a spiritual warfare, even sickness and things of that nature, in a sense that we can be tempted to throw in the towel or question God's nearness or allow those things to so cause us to be bitter that we rebel against God or forsake Him altogether. That happens. But when you understand it's Jesus who can really provide courage for us, look at 16, verse 33. I love this passage here. He says, "These things I have spoken to you so that you may have peace." Okay? So his words are doing the opposite. You shouldn't feel troubled. You actually should have peace. He says, "In me you have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world." You get questions, with all the things that happen. Where's God in all the, the rioting, the cultural rot, and stuff like that? Doesn't God care? You can always bring up that question. Something happens to me. Where's God? Why did God allow this to happen? Those are the main issue of the atheist or whatever is, if God is so good, God is so benevolent, then why do bad things happen? Which, if they were honest intellectually, I think that's not a valid argument, because there's not a fundamental aspect that God has promised, or it's not in His character, or in His character to allow everybody just to suffer indiscriminately. They always forget about the element of free will and the enemy that's out there that we refer to as Satan. This evil itself exists. It also goes against the way we grow as people. If we want to be healthier, then we've got to work with what we might call with resistance. In other words, we got to resist this and choose that. We got to resist this and do that. Every athlete understands that if they're going to perform at their peak, then they have to go through some hurts and pains to get there, right? No pain, no gain. Well, why did that cliche arise? Well, that's the truth of it. I guess it would be nice, but probably really not, if we got everything we wanted and everything was already all fine and good. Think how selfish we would be. So there's something about life that is to the benefit of us and the challenges that we face and the evils that occur. But despite all of this, isn't it, think about this, in me you have peace, okay? In the world, there's what? Tribulation. What's tribulation, by the way? That's always a word that's thrown out by premillennialists and things of that nature. What's tribulation? Troubles. What else? Got another synonym? Yeah. 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 They view, when you hear tribulation, it's always a view and a theory that there's a period of tribulation that's going to occur that will blow your mind away. But tribulation itself refers to the idea of affliction, trouble, problems, all these things. That's what you have in the world. That's what the world, isn't that? When you look at it, that's the world, right? Now, we live in the world, but we're not what? Of the world. In me you have peace, despite the fact that you live in a world of tribulation. That don't even make sense, does it? Sure it does, to those who believe and know God. There's something about unfettered courage exhibited by people of faith. Hebrews 11, of course, is one of those chapters that, in all kinds of ways, highlights people of faith. We're always familiar with, Noah, Enoch, and Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah. They're listed, some of the main characters. But when we get to the unnamed heroes of faith, you have some some statements like beaten, caused to wander in skin of animals, those who were sawn in two. That's pretty graphic there. Sawn in two. Those who are mutilated because of faith. They weren't treated very kindly back in antiquity, believers. So, courage. Courage and faith go together. Faith fuels courage. It's kind of like, I think it was Diogenes, a philosopher. I think that's the one. If not, you can check it on me, but it comes to my mind. But Alexander the Great came to a city where he was, and Diogenes was there kind of sunning himself. Okay, and Alexander the Great wanted to meet this philosopher. And so they were introduced, and the words out of Diogenes, of the philosopher, was, "Would you get out of the way? You're in my sunlight." This is Alexander the Great. It's that kind of thing in regard to our relationship with Christ that gives us the courage to live for Christ no matter who the ruler is, the president is, or what have you. Whatever we read or whatever happens in our world, who is the one who sets up kings and destroys kingdoms? It's God. There's a certain amount of courage that exudes from us spiritually. Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. The pain is greater than the joy is greater than the pain. Though at the moment we can't fathom how. So, the only way, the only access to true comfort, true courage, and in John 15, verses 5 through 7, the vine and the branches, you're familiar with that parable that Jesus tells. Beginning in verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you may bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. What is fruit? Bear much fruit. What's that? What does it mean to bear fruit? Yeah, doing that which glorifies God. We have the fruit of the Spirit that's mentioned, love, joy, peace, and all those good things that we're familiar with. It's getting our dictates, if you please, from a different source. And so we're very conscientious about honoring and glorifying God. That's where the true source of accomplishment is. Now, I know all of you guys and gals have accomplished a lot of things in your life. And you're to be commended and honored for what you've accomplished. But think about the accomplishments that occur in the kingdom. Okay, the only way that we accomplish and engage is to be fully rooted or grafted in, or be a part of that trunk that gives us the source that we need to do God's will. The true source of accomplishment. I always think it's funny during football season, and you see this a lot. And it's really in any game. It's almost soccer stuff, but it's funny in football because if a good play is made by a running back or somebody makes a spectacular tackle on someone, the first thing that's done usually by the individual making a touchdown is they take that helmet off so the TV can shine on their face. It's me, and then do your dance in the end zone. That's fine. It's fun. It's entertaining. But in reality, that person's accomplishment was facilitated by what? A lot of people, okay? And one of the aspects of Christianity is recognizing who it is that provides our achievements and accomplishments. Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, and who gives the increase? God does. The plant and the water is just, the acts that we're involved in, that we're commanded to be involved in. But what makes it bear fruit, of course, is God's involvement with us. So Jesus is the only truth about comfort, courage, and accomplishment. All right? Jesus is the only life. The life that really counts. So what is that? Practical. It's the life of true love. The life of true service is the first one. Love's the second one. The life of true service. Look at John 13. You recall when Jesus washes his disciples' feet, and beginning in verse 14, he says, If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should do as I also did to you. Life of true service. Engaging in that which seems on the surface to be insignificant. Think about service for a minute. Christianity has been known by its contribution to the aid of people. There's something about Christianity. Hospitals are built, things of that nature. You don't see a hospital that has the name, the demonic hospital of Satan, USA. There's just something about the nature of Christianity that drives our benevolence and compassion for people. Yeah. They wouldn't have done that. They would expect their feet to be washed. That's the whole point in the condemnation of the disciples. They all came into this house with dirty feet and everything, and there wasn't a servant, so none of them thought, I don't know if they didn't give it a thought or just assumed that since there's no servant there to do what is customarily done, that they would just kind of, overlook it. But Jesus got up. Look at this. The Lord of heaven and earth got up and washed the feet of his puny ones that he created. Now that's just mind-boggling. And yet, that is the lesson. If I did that, then you should do that on a very smaller scale to one another. If God does this to his creation, then certainly the creation can do it to their fellow creation, people. So God is the only life for true service. God, or Jesus, is the life of true love. So John 13, beginning in verse 34. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men shall know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So there's two apologetic statements relative to proving the existence of God, or proving that there's something beyond just earth and mortal man. The first one is at the end in John 17, when it talks about unity, that y'all may be one, just as I and the Father are, that you may be one in us, so that the what? World will believe that God has sent you. Here's another. That's an apologetic. That's a proof. We've already practiced apologetics. We talk about a lot of different things. We never talk about the power apologetic of unity. And we never talk about the powerful apologetic of love. A new commandment I've given to you. Well, it's not a new commandment that it begins, never heard of before, because I know in the Old Testament they were commanded in the Ten Commandments to do what? The first one. He said there's two that sum up everything. The first four dealt with God. Honor God. He's no other gods before him, stuff like that. The last six of the Ten Commandments deal with what? Human to human situation. Jesus summed them up. To love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the first four of the Ten Commandments. And then love your neighbor as yourself, which takes care of the final six. So, what is the new commandment then? Yeah. The whole it's new. Even John talks about this in 1 John. The new commandment. Love one another. The new commandment is from the new perspective that comes or converges at the cross. See, Jesus provides a whole new dimension of what love is that no one had ever contemplated before. Israel knew God's love and God provided for them, things of that nature. They still had to slaughter animals and things in regard to their sins to seek forgiveness, redemption, and all this. But the death of Jesus on the cross and His resurrection gave a whole new insight, perspective of what love is. This is why Paul, when he talks about the practical things of husbands and wives, he says to the husband, love your wife as Christ loved the church. He gave Himself up for her. Now, how did that come about? It's the convergence. You see, it's love from the perspective of the cross. It changed the whole dynamic. So I've got the military man there that is back there. He's got his noose. So Jesus is the only life of love, life of joy, life of true peace. And then the fourth heading, Jesus is the only access to greater faith. You can read these passages on your own. And to a greater future. If you believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house our many dwelling places. So, and there is salvation in no one else, but there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved. And all of that we must be saved, yeah, there's redemption, but all of this, the way, the truth, and the life is wrapped up in that as well. I mean, it's a lot to consider, right? Okay, any questions, comments, rebuts, or whatever? All right, thank you. That closes it out.